everyone. I'm Jim Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association, and I'm stepping in today for our President, İpek Yosmoğlu, who couldn't be with us, but sends her regrets nonetheless. And thank you all for joining us for today's WhatsApp session with Feyza, Burak, Adli on the exciting topic of the portrait of an Alla Franca Shaykh, Sufism, Modernity, and Class in Turkey, which is the topic of an article she's recently published in IJMIS. Is that correct, Feyza? Wonderful. Before we get started, before I introduce her a little bit more fully, I just want to note for everyone, we have 2 more sessions in our WhatsApp series before we round out the academic year. The next one is going to be on May 23rd. That's, I believe, a Friday at noon Central Time. And this is going to be a special tribute to our dear colleague Linda Darling, entitled Transforming Empire, Ottomans from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. And we will be joined in that session by Linda Darling, as well as Serpil Atamaz, Honoré Nal, and Alexander Schweig. And then in June, on the 20th, we are going to have a presentation from Samuel Hurst from Bilkent University on his exciting new book, Against the Liberal Order, the Soviet Union, Turkey, and Statist Internationalism, 1919 to 1939. So I hope you all can join us for those 2 events in May and June, and there are links in the chat to register for those, and we'll see you there then. All right, so on to today's business. As I said, we have with us Feyza Burak Adli. She is a visiting scholar at the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs and the Department of Anthropology at Northwestern University, where she also serves as a faculty fellow at Willard Residential College. She earned her PhD in cultural anthropology from Boston University in 2020, and her dissertation there was titled Trajectories of Modern Sufism, an ethno-historical study of the Rifai order and social changes in Turkey. She also holds a joint MA in anthropology and women, gender, and sexuality studies from Brandeis, and an MA in English from Wake Forest. Before joining Northwestern, she taught at the University of Virginia, the Ibero-Americana University in Mexico City, and Yeditepe University in Turkey. Her ethnographic and historical research in Turkey explores how upper middle-class Rifai Sufis navigated the entanglements of secularity and religiosity in shaping ethical life worlds and Muslim subjectivities. She examines how Sufis engage with and transform religiosity and secularity in novel ways. Her forthcoming book, tentatively titled Other Muslim Women, Alternative Politics of Piety, Feminism, and Class in Turkey, is under advanced contract with the University of North Carolina Press as part of their Islamic Civilization and Muslim Network series. Besides her IJMIS article, which she's going to talk with us about today, she recently co-edited a special issue of Culture and Religion on Sufism and Gender, contributing both an editorial essay and her own article. And she has also published a book chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Religion on Turkey, where she critically charted the genealogy of Turkish Islamic feminism. Her work has received awards from various institutions, including the Society for the Study of Muslim Ethics, MIT Motherboard Award in Women's Studies, and Boston University's Women's Guild. So please join me in welcoming Feyza Burak Adli, and take it away from here, Feyza.
Thank you, Jim, for this introduction and hosting me. Thank you, Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association, for the invitation. Merhaba, everyone. So I appreciate all of you joining today, but I have to say I appreciate those even more who can keep their cameras on and stay with me. You know, we are going through some crazy times, both in Turkey and the US. It really feels good to see your faces, that we are not alone. Okay, the paper that I present here today, as Jim said, was published in IJMIS Open Access. It is part of my broader ethnographic work on Turkish Sufism. It is about the life and the career and the thought of an late Ottoman and early Republican Sufi sheikh named Kenan Rifai. And to me, his portrait mattered because it complicates our understanding of the making of modern subjectivities in Turkey. Wait a second, I have to share my screen for my PowerPoint that I forgot. And here we go. Right, okay. Yeah, so as I said, it matters because of this different picture of Sufi subjectivities in Turkey at the turn of the century. It illustrates the diversity of ways in which Sufi traditions adapted to political order of a modernizing state and society. I have a side note here. For those of you who are interested in Sufi subjectivities in the Cold War era, I also have another paper published in that sense on Samiha Ayverdi, very different than Kenan Rifai. And then for those who are more interested in the contemporary Sufi subjectivities today in Turkey, please stay tuned for my book and some articles coming up. Okay, let's go back to the 19th century. Kenan Rifai was an interesting figure. Hailing from the Balkans, he was a religious authority with a westernized lifestyle that we commonly associate with secularist elites, right? For instance, he enjoyed being a francophone. He enjoyed wearing European suits and brimmed hats, as you can see in the third picture. He played the piano and the violin. He frequented theaters and studied Western philosophy. Interestingly, he endorsed the Republican ban of Sufi orders in 1925, although he was a sheikh himself. But he remained true to classical Sufi tradition. That is, he held on to the Sufi doctrine of Wahdat al-Wujud, Wahdedi Wujud, which means unity of being. It postulates a non-dualist, a monist ontology and cosmology of the universe. So it suggests that every creation that we see here and every event that takes place is a manifestation of God or God's names and attributes. In other words, in this view, God is both transcendental, but also immanent. So when you believe in Wahdat al-Wujud, that also means that people like Kenan Rifai actually held an enchanted perception of the universe, right? Although he was supporting the state's secularization and rationalization efforts, he still had that non-disenchanted perception of the universe where he can communicate with God, where he sought a mystical, intimate relation with God. As you can see, he defies easy categorizations that we see in the literature. I actually have a poem about this, which I loved when I first heard about it. And it says in Turkish, dinli der dinsiz bize, dinsiz levmeder bizi. Biz ne ondan bundanız, hem de ondan bundanız. To translate roughly, the pious saw us as an infidel. The infidel rebukes us as a pious. We are neither from this nor from that. We are yet both this and that. And this seems to be exactly what attracted his followers to him, a multi-ethnic, gender-mixed, and multi-faith group of educated people. In the writings, they constantly idolized his ability to navigate multiple ways of being during these times of radical transformation. They underscored how he maintained a pious Muslim subjectivity without compromise, while at the same time truly inhabiting a modern lifestyle. For instance, in his capacity as a musician and a composer, Kenan Rifai composed Naats, the lyrical poetry in the praise of Prophet Muhammad. So it's a religious hymn, religious literature. But he played them and he composed them on the piano. So merging Sufi devotional traditions with Western musical forms. Here, I'll show you a fun fact. So this scene is from last fall, 2024, in Carnegie Hall in New York, where his oeuvre of Sufi poetry and Sufi music was performed by Philharmonic Orchestra and various tenors. And they called the event as Birliğin Sesi, the sound of oneness. And to me, this event showed that his legacy of modernizing the traditional still resonates with contemporary spiritual seekers or the music lovers. Okay. So in my presentation, I suggest that Kenan Rifai was not merely accommodating secular state reforms. Neither out of fear of persecution or out of pragmatism, as some of the religious authorities did. In his case, he was actively reinterpreting Islamic thought and Sufi practice in compatible ways with the changing world of his followers. And in order to understand how late Ottoman Sufis like Kenan Rifai managed to reconcile these things, reconcile Islamic ethics, state politics, and modern aesthetics, I ask the questions. What did modernity, piety, or Muslim identity mean to him in the first place? How did he define those things? And how did he perceive and practice Islam in his daily life? How did he personally experience the political landscape of his time? After all, the same context was experienced in different ways, right, by different people. And how did his intersectional identity, the identity is shaped by his not only religious identity, but also ethnicity and race, class and gender, and other components of one's social location, informed his approach to both Islam and modernizing Turkey. So the rest of my talk has 4 parts. The first 3 steps, the first 3 parts represent a different dimension of Ottoman Sheikh's positionality vis-a-vis a transitioning state and a modernizing society. And the last part will provide concrete examples of this interplay between these 3 dimensions. Because in my analysis, all the first 3 are really closely imbricated. So what are those? I will talk about 1, the political context, and 2, social habitus, as I said, intersectional identity, and 3, his Islamic thought, the religious discourse. And then lastly, I will have some examples of how they are getting all together. And shorthandedly, I called them politics, aesthetics, and ethics. Okay, the first part, the context. I will keep this part actually very short, given this audience is very most of us very familiar with this history. And also since my colleague Brett Wilson did a fantastic job in narrating this history of late Ottoman Sufism on this the same platform last month, I believe. And it is on YouTube for those who are interested to hear more about this history. For me, it is suffice to say that from the early 19th century onwards, Sufi lodges faced criticism and subjected to top-down reforms. And all these reforms culminated in the ban of the orders in 1925. Here I assembled a very short timeline, a quick timeline. Basically, since 1812, the orders lost their financial and administrative autonomy to the state, to the centralized state. Especially during the second constitutional era, the Sufi orders were a hot topic of criticism from both sides of the political spectrum, as Westernists and Islamist public intellectuals saw Sufism as a relic of the past, impeding social progress. And during this time, even the Sufis themselves, especially the elite Sufi circles, raised their concerns about their institutional decline. And they tried to initiate some internal reform efforts, like they founded civil society associations, they founded and wrote in journals to discuss how can we make Sufism better and reform the orders. And then comes the Turkish War of Independence, of course. During this time, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk allied closely with Sufi leaders. They were together in the war. But roughly 2 years after the foundation of the Republic in 1923, there was the Sheikh Said rebellion, as we all know, in 1925. And under the pretext of this rebellion, Atatürk formally banned the Sufi orders, as well as the official religious garbs and titles like Sheikhut. So the obvious question is...
Excuse me, can you minimize your the peoples in your screen so that the entire screen can be visible?
No, how do I do this?
Not that one. Yeah, that can work, I guess. Now you need to reshare it.
Okay. Did it work?
Not quite. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. Where was I? Yeah, how did the Sufis react to the ban? So as of now, we know that the Sufis of various kinds responded to the Republican ban in particular, and all the other secularization reforms in diverse ways, ranging from outright rejection to active endorsement, or most of them negotiated a space in between those spectrum. However, the early scholarship, unfortunately, largely overlooked the spectrum of the responses, except scholars such as İsmail Kara, Mustafa Kara, Rüya Kılıç, Hülya Küçük, Brett Wilson, and Brian Silverstein have contributed to the understanding of the complexities and the varieties of these responses lately. We can also add Kristen Fab and Amit Bain to this list of scholars as they critically assess the role of religious authorities in the state modernization processes. And I will build on these studies by analyzing multiple layers of Sufi adaptations. So part 2, habitus, social habitus. Before I further delve into Kenan Rifai's life here, let me say a word about my main source and its limitations. So basically his biography written by his 4 of his female followers that you can see here. I understand that while a hagiographic biography may not meet the standards of archival precision, especially for historians, it still provides insights to how Sufism was reformulated under the pressures of Turkish modernity. So in a way, I approached this text as an ethnographer. I took it as a window into how his modern followers saw him and presented him like a Weberian type of ideal modern religious authority. The book also served as a source of oral history, revealing clues about the lives and anxieties of the pious upper class at the turn of the century. For instance, these female biographers that you see on the screen embodied what we can maybe call hybrid identities, rooted in both Islamic mysticism and intellectual currents of modern Turkey. Take Samiha Ayverdi, for example, if I can quickly introduce you these writers. Ayverdi was a novelist, a historian, and a conservative nationalist, a public intellectual who published over 40 books, many of them dedicated to reviving Ottoman Muslim heritage. And she was a right-wing intellectual, right? Whereas Nezihe Aras was standing up. She was a leftist and then a Kemalist journalist and a historian. Her works ranged from different biographies. On the one hand, biographies of Atatürk. On the other hand, biographies of Anatolian saints. Then we had Sophie Huri. She was an Arab Orthodox Christian, a Cambridge-educated scholar. She was the director of Red House Dictionary in Istanbul, and she translated the works of writers such as Tolstoy, Tagore, and Muhammad Iqbal. And finally, Safiye Erol, a famous female Republican novelist. She received her PhD in Germany. And honestly, I personally was more intrigued by her essays in the book, as she masterfully and in a very academic language blended Sufi thought with modern Western philosophy and modern Republican ideals. So for these women, Sufism provided an alternative to the binaries imposed by their era. It was neither purely secular nor purely traditional. Instead, it offered a space where they could be both intellectuals and mystics, modern but rooted in heritage. They seem to find solace in Kenan Rifai's circle, since they must have been, this is my speculation, of course, unable to connect with either the uneducated, the traditional religious folks, the other Sufis, let's say lower class Sufis, or with the highly educated but positivist and secularist intellectuals. So let's get back to the Kenan Rifai's life. Born in 1869 in Salonika, Kenan Rifai came from an Ottoman Balkan family belonging to an Ayan dynasty. Ayans are the notables, the property notables of Plovdiv, Filibe. He, growing up in multi-ethnic and multi-religious urban centers such as Salonika and Plovdiv, his early childhood experiences were embedded in Ottoman cosmopolitanism. Both his grandfather and his father were members of early modernizing Tanzimat establishment, and they both held high-ranking positions in the Ottoman administration. His mother was also from an Ayan family, and notably, she was presented as his Kenan Rifai's first murshid, first Sufi master. So this family background positioned him at the intersection of the two worlds already, right? On the one hand, the paternal side was discussing the rationalist ideologies of and West Tanzimat elites, and they were introducing westernized social norms. And also because they're from Balkans, they were already European in culture. And on the other hand, there was the mystical tradition of Sufism introduced by his mother. Education, as the son of an Ayan family, he received the finest education available in his time, attending newly established schools of the empire, such as Greek elementary school, and also interestingly, for I think elementary to middle school, he went to Alliance Israélite Universelle, a prestigious French Jewish middle school. And finally, he moved to Istanbul and went to a Francophone boarding school named Galatasaray Lisesi. So he came of age under the Hamidian period, Abdülhamid II. And he graduated from Galatasaray in this period in 1888. So he was equipped with expertise in both religious and modern traditions of knowledge, which was the curriculum Abdülhamid was imposing, along with a moral sense of loyalty to the state, right? That's also propagated in high doses by the Hamidian education policies. He could speak 8 languages, including French, Arabic, Persian, Hebrew, Greek, and Bulgarian. And he was learning English in his last years of his life. Career-wise, he attended law school for a while after graduation, but then he started his lifelong career in the Ottoman Ministry of Education. He served not just in Istanbul and the capital, but also in major territories of the empire, from eastern Western Anatolia to Balkans, from northern Black Sea region to Hijaz, and in the south. So first he started in Istanbul, then he went to Balıkesir, to Adana, to Manastır and Kosovo, then to Trabzon, back to Istanbul, and to Medina, and back to Istanbul again. Rifai's bureaucratic responsibilities in the Ministry of Education included typical tasks of Hamidian policies, from overseeing new idadi school constructions to raising local funds for the schools and inspecting foreign schools' licenses and curriculum. These were the very controversial areas of the time. And he worked also in various capacities as a teacher, as school principal, to more higher ranking positions like City Director of Education, Milli Eğitim Müdürü, and Inspector of Education. He taught several subjects in these schools, such as biology, physics, geography, and French. It's a fun fact, but he even wrote a biology textbook titled Muktezai Hayat, The Essentials of Life, by translating the French science journals. During the second constitutional era led by the Unionists, he was back in Istanbul, and he worked in several places such as Dersaadet Darul Muallimin Aliye, Istanbul Teachers Training School. He was in the Council of Inspectors for a while. Then he became the director of prestigious Darüşşafaka boarding school. And he was assigned to Scientific Research Council, if I translated it correctly. It is Tetkikati İlmiye Encümeni in 1920. Then he formally retired in 1921. Now, there's a myth told by his followers that after the foundation of the Republic, Atatürk offered him a position in his cabinet. Some says it was the director of the Diyanet, or the other says Minister of Education. However, Rifai reportedly declined this offer and involvement in real politics. Of course, as an anthropologist, I could neither verify nor falsify this claim. Rather than working with the government, Kenan Rifai spent the 13 years of his retirement between 1929 to 1942 teaching at Fener Orthodox Greek High School. At a time, no less, when nationalist policies were actively targeting Greek minorities. Even today, his portrait hangs on the wall of Fener Lisesi. Interesting enough, his biography, his hagiography here, which is used as a Sufi manual even today, contains testimonies and letters from his Greek colleagues in the school and his Greek students who described him as benevolent fatherly figure. So it appeared that Rifai maintained a sense of Ottomanism during the Republican period, blending it with the Sufi ethics of pluralism. Now, quickly let me go through his career trajectory as a religious authority, which was parallel to his secular career. So as we see, he did not follow the conventional trajectory of an Ottoman Sufi sheikh. He wasn't raised within a family lodge led by his father and his grandfather before him, right? His spiritual training began under the tutelage of his mother at the age of 19. Then he became a disciple of Qadiri Sheikh Ethem Efendi, who didn't have a lodge, but the murshid was staying with him every once in a while. He later studied under Sheikh Hamza al-Rifai while he was in Medina, and he stayed in the lodge, so the tekke, for 4 years, where he received his ijaza. His Sufi journey never took him out of the modern life, as he continued his day job as an idealist bureaucrat, working to modernize the empire. Upon returning to Istanbul from Medina, he became a civil sheikh, hosting literary and musical salons for Sufi dialogues in his own konak, his mansion. However, these gatherings drew suspicion from the Hamidian administration. One night, they raided his residence on allegations of secret Young Turk activity. Per the palace orders, Rifai was forced to formalize his position as a Sufi sheikh by establishing an official lodge, tekke, which he converted his konak to a tekke by adding another building next to it, and registering himself in the Assembly of Sheikhs, Meclis-i Meşayih. So between 1908 to 1925, for 18 years, he operated in a traditional tekke as a traditional sheikh. But he mainly gave lectures on Mesnevi, and rumor has it from gossipers like Rev Nakolu that Kenan Rifai had to hire, or let's say transfer external dervishes from other lodges to perform the weekly ceremonial Ayin rituals. As for Kenan Rifai, it was never the ritual practices itself, but the school of thought of Sufism mattered more. He was not trained himself as the best ritual expert or anything. So to sum up his social habitus, this account of his life is significant because it displays how late Ottoman Balkan elite embodied multiple cultural orientations at once, how these upper-class Ottoman families inhabited an Alla Franca lifestyle together, and how they internalized both traditions of scientific knowledge and religious knowledge. And lastly, I drew attention to the class status in the late Ottoman society, that the class played a prominent role in responding to modernization and westernization. And I'd say the role was bigger than an ideology of secularity as we used to think. And let me go through his Islamic thought for a while, and I think I'm running out of time soon. So in Turkish studies, we tend to reify Islam as a fixed category. We just say Islam or religion. However, religious groups approached Islam in vastly different ways, with significant divergences, even in terms of cosmology and ontology, as I mentioned before. I'm not even referring to differences like Sunni and Shi'i or Sufi and Salafi, because even within those categories like Sufism, the discourse and practices are so diverse that the category is misleading. Therefore, rather than treating Islam or Sufism as a monolithic entity, I found it more productive to examine Sufi traditions case by case. So what was Islam for Kenan Rifai? For him, Islam was a living tradition, a capacious tradition, historically responsive to social change. In his sohbets, lectures, he often justified the renewal of tradition, the need for renewal of tradition, by drawing strategically on the genealogy of Islam, like most notably emphasizing Prophet Muhammad's role as a reformer of his own time. He was highly critical of reactionary religious establishment of the time, accusing them of being anchored in dogmatism and harming society. For instance, this is a quote from one of his sohbets. He is referring to this reactionary ulama and says, if you're a spiritual guide who wants Islam to advance, you would be a sinner if you prevent Muslims from gaining scientific knowledge. How dare you discourage the modern seekers with your unenlightened, stern behavior? How can you tell them things like, be ashamed of your modern clothing, take off those tight pants and wear the attire of the Zaman Saadet, or those places like called theater or cinema will render you an infidel? Or do not put a gold tooth cap? Why don't you tell them instead to embrace the morality of the Prophet rather than his clothing? Do you think the Prophet was sent to humanity to regulate fashion or morality? So by tactically juxtaposing fashion against morality, gold tooth against spirit, headgear against heart, he distinguished between the contingent social aspects of religion and the essential spiritual core. And as he conceptualized Islam into two distinct spheres of divinity and humanity, ilahi and beshari, he emphasized the adaptability of Sharia to various temporal and spatial contexts, as long as, he said, the universal, the esoteric, the divine essence of Islam remained intact, and he defined this essence as Hakikati Muhammadi, the truth, the Hakika, which goes back to Wahdat al-Wujud, right? So one may say, most of the Muslim reformers categorized Islam as essential and maybe contingent, but the specific content of these categories usually varied, right? One key example would be the veil of the Muslim woman. Unlike most of his contemporary Islamist reformers, Rifai saw nothing inherently Islamic for the basis of gender norms. So I suggest here that his twofold framework, Ilahi and Beshari, enabled Sheikh Rifai to support state secularization reform by grounding his reasoning in Islam. And I think should I stop here, Jim? Because I have some examples how he did that.
You can go for another 5 minutes. I think we're
okay.
at least that long we're good.
Sure. So in the paper I gave 3 examples of how he reinterpreted Islam in a way to endorse new state moral order, social order, and how this was really informed by his class status. For instance, one of them was the idea of the new man, the citizen, right? The new national identity. So he seamlessly integrated Sufi spirituality with the citizenship ethics of the modern nation state by invoking key Sufi concepts such as selfless service to align spiritual devotion with civic responsibility. He adapted the processes and language of Sufi self-formation, Seyri Suluk, to align with the modern nation state's new moral order. And shaping Sufi subjectivity, which is called Insan-ı Kamil, which is the telos of all Sufis, right? They want to become an Insan-ı Kamil, in ways that resonated with the state ideals of industrious, obedient, and morally upright citizens. he emphasized Sufi virtues like duty, sacrifice, and selflessness over individual rights, echoing other thinkers like Ziya Gökalp and other nationalists. And his spiritual training aimed to cultivate basically socially responsible moral agents driven by divine love. I think by integrating national ethics with Sufi ideals as such, Rifai might have distinguished his order from the lower class Sufi lodges, which were, dismissed as the centers of ignorance, passivity, idleness. So he is bringing a new definition of Sufi dervish, is very active, very working for the greater good, right? And another thing I looked at, how he responded to ban of Sufi orders by, grounding in Islam. So one of the things that really affected his welcoming attitude to the ban was his class status, of course, because one, he had a day job, right? He didn't had to lost all his livelihood like most of the other sheikhs who were not even qualified to do anything else when the orders were banned. And being a high-ranking bureaucrat also provided him a lens, a field experience to see the declining conditions of these institutions and how the exigencies of his time and the state financial needs determined the declining fate of the Sufi orders. So he was familiar with this. And thirdly, and this is I think I don't know if we can discuss this if it's my idea, but I think being an Ottoman state elite meant internalizing this utmost loyalty to the state as a moral value, as an Islamic value, because the idea of state for them was above all personal desires. And unlike, self-made British bourgeoisie, the Ottoman Empire created its own elites, right? So the state elites owned their high status and their worldviews and their values and their socialization to the societal, to the state's order, to the state's education. So they have internalized the conception of the state like dinu devlet or nizam-ı alem. And he also to intertwine this historically contingent normative discourses with meta-historical ethics of Sufi Islam to endorse these reforms. He also legitimized compliance with Republic as an Islamic duty by invoking the principle of ulul amr, a sacred obligation of Muslims to be obedient to the ruler. He said, the rule of law is Sharia for us. We obey the orders of the state because we know the real speaker behind these man-made laws is God himself. So here he can code switch between the political and the spiritual. In another quote, he said, the voice of the people is the voice of God. Directly or indirectly, what is manifested in everything is God. Therefore, you cannot talk against the ban of Sufi orders. It is God who made it happen. God is the planner, the organizer, the doer, and there's always a wisdom behind his actions. To be able to see this truth, you must attain the knowledge of Tawheed. Once you achieve it, start to see God everywhere you look, you will naturally let go of your sins and vices. Without this experiential knowledge of Tawheed, your heart is simply a temple of idols, even if you claim you worship only God. So as you see, he saw the Republican ban as the will of God, and in a way equating opposition to state to blasphemy. I think I'm going to stop here for now. And then in the Q&A, I can also talk about my last example of how he aligned his gender norms or like his approach to women to state feminism. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Feyza. Are you able to stop sharing, or we'll just?
Yeah,
I'll let you figure that out. Yeah.
I think it worked, right?
Not yet. I think you have to hit that stop share button with it in the red.
Okay. It doesn't, in my screen, it doesn't show me I'm still sharing actually. Okay, I see it.
There you go. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much, Feyza. I will open it up to questions here. You can pop them in the chat or raise your hand and ask them. I really enjoyed that talk, Feyza. I have one or two questions. Maybe I'll just take the privilege and jump in. Although Nilay has raised her hand, so I may turn to her first. Really quick on the draw. So why don't you ask a question, Nilay, and then I'll keep mine in reserve.
I mean, feel free to. I just raised my hand.
Go
thank you so much, Feyza. This is really interesting. I think topics related to Sufi orders or quote unquote non-orthodox ways of understanding and practicing Islam is always up to date, always urgent to think about. In the Middle East and elsewhere, I think, not just the Middle East, religion and state, political power and religious ideology. So thank you very much for that, and congratulations on the publication of the article. This is not a topic that I know that much about, and I haven't read the article, so please take my question with these reservations. At the beginning of your talk, when you talk about Rifai, I perceived it as like you're presenting his modernity and his religious identity or religiosity. It came across as like binary or as unusual, as being a religious person, like a Sufi leader, and being modern. It sounded as if this is like a quite interesting, unique, unusual situation. To what extent, I don't know, is this what you really meant? Or is he really unusual from this point of view, considering his contemporaries within Turkey and larger Middle East, post-Ottoman world as such? That's my first question. And maybe you can point out the existing literature on this like modernity and religiosity within a Sufi order context. Do we have to consider these as like in dichotomous ways? Is it not possible to be modern and adopting religiosity in ways that is acceptable and normal and mainstream and common sense, if you will? And my second question is, if you touched upon it, but I really would like you elaborate on what was his justification for saying okay to the closure of the Sufi orders in the early Republican period. I think this is what you said. He was okay with it. I would really appreciate this because you said your main source is the biographies written by those women, which I think quite interesting. I think that deserves a. You said you wrote an article. I think that's a book in and of itself, the biographies that they wrote. But does that information, like why he thought it was okay, does that come from the biographies of those women? Is it like in hindsight? Or what in essence was a political move was justified and attributed a romanticized rationality in further decades? So if you could please elaborate on that, I would be grateful.
Thank you. These are both great questions. And the first one is a yes and no question. Was it unusual? It is unusual if you consider the majority of the literature of the time, right? So that's the national historiography, the decline paradigm, all this official early histories. There was the Sufis were always depicted in opposition to the secular modernity or republic, especially after the ban. And then I mentioned some of the names that other scholars, first of all, Ismail Kara and Mustafa Kara, and then others came in that list, that they started to show the accurate picture that it wasn't like that. It was way more diverse. There was a huge spectrum of responses, but to me, what was kind of unusual or like special about Kenan Rifai was that he was officially and formally the authority of modern education, the authority of religious education, because within the state bureaucracy, he was, he was a sheikh, like a civil servant sheikh, and he was a bureaucrat in the Ministry of Modern Education. And these were the ones that were seen incompatible, right? Like when you look at Carter Finley's and other kind of historiographies, we always see that modern education replaced religious education, or religious educator were, not happy with their replacement with science. But this guy was actually unofficially the both of them. And no, I don't think he was marginal. I think there are so many of these figures. And I think Brett Wilson, who talked like last month, I think, in this platform, he is making an amazing database now. He's collecting all the other people like Kenan Rifai, and more research is showing that there were so many figures, but they were all upper class and educated religious authorities who were in the same camp with the Republican elite by being the vanguards of the new nation. And it was not necessarily about the ideology of the Westernist and the secularists, and it was more about this mission of the vanguard elite class to let's uplift this nation, let's build this state, and of course there was a spectrum of opinions within that first parliament and second parliament, but the legacy of Ottoman Empire from the second constitutional era, these were nothing new. That the ban was nothing new. It was already discussed, right, in the parliament. It was already discussed in public platforms like journals, that Kenan Rifai were just like, or people like him were just reiterating and doing to the public. That's why it wasn't too oh my God, normal. And I think this also answers your second question in a way, right? So we can say the legacy of the Ottoman modernization efforts, especially the Sufi orders, starting long ago and culminating to a political condition where the state doesn't have any funds anymore to really spend to revive these orders, is institutions, the material decline, and also there was the fear of political opposition and their political influence on the sheikhs that Atatürk banned the order, and people like him was like, yeah, I expect it was coming, Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yit, I think, had his hand up. Go ahead, Yit.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Feyza. So I would like to ask about his following. I mean, we know about these four women who famously wrote about him, and being dedicated followers of Kenan Rifai. But apart from them, do we know any, or do we have an idea how big his following was, and how diverse that was, or is it just these elite women who had the luxury to follow him?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's also an amazing question. Of course, I don't have the document that shows me the membership of his lodge, but I can say that his circle, because we're talking about the educated Sufi circle, it was relatively small, all elite, but diverse. Diverse in the sense that he had among his followers a Kaldani Patrick, an Orthodox Patrick, some I think Catholic priest, because he was also, with the Greek community. So he had those Christians coming to his lodge, and he had women and men in terms of gender diversity. He had people like ulama. Oh, like he had, actually, it's interesting, 3 Shaykhul Islam was coming to his lodge. I don't remember those names, but I think they're on my paper. The last 3 Shaykhul Islam was in his circle. There were some artists like hattats who were doing calligraphy. So when you look at there are some different portraits within the biography of other people who were in itself. I was like, oh, I'm really curious about this guy now, So it was diverse in that sense, like multi-faith, multi-ethnic, and different maybe walks of life, but they were all at the end educated and intellectual circle.
Sorry, fantastic. I had a visitor for a moment there. Feyza, I have a couple questions actually. I think might build on your answer to Nilay a bit, because I thought that was a really interesting response to those questions. The first being, you mentioned in the talk that you kind of juxtaposed Rifai against more reactionary sheikhs or Muslim movements in the Republican period, and I was curious which ones you had in mind, or which ones did he juxtapose himself against, or which ones did he criticize, and sort of more broadly, how might we place Rifai in the context of other, pious political movements of the 20s and 30s? I mean, this is kind of the moment that a group of other scholars has sort of termed it like conservative modernism, right? That kind of encompasses figures like Peyami Safa or Necip Fazıl Kısakürek or these types of folks, right? Who are not sheikhs, like don't have the Ottoman kind of lineage that Rifai does, but are engaging in different kinds of pious politics at the same time under this sort of Republican framework, right? So, like, help me place him in that context, and which ones is he really juxtaposed against, and which ones might he find common cause with, and so forth. And then the second question comes also to this question of the way you use class as a way of understanding Rifai's social position, especially in the post-Ottoman period. I wonder if also this is not a question of genealogy. You mentioned that he comes from an Ayan class, right, or an Ayan family, right? And this may just be because I recently finished reading and reviewing Adam Mestian's book on modern Arab kingship, where he talks all about the post-Ottoman social order in the Arab world being really contingent on the Sharifian order, or the interplay between Ashraf and religious, figures and so forth. And Rifai seems to be a figure that embodies both of those things, but from a very different, geographic background and working in the Republican context rather than the Arab one. So maybe there is something, maybe you can talk about like the impact of his genealogy, his status as Nayan, apart from being upper middle class and so forth, having a particular impact on his influence and his movement.
Yeah, well, thank you. These are two big but very important questions. So in terms of who did he reacted against? Who were the reactionary ulama that he was writing against? That the quote I showed you. He was not naming the names as far as I see. So I couldn't find a specific event of a specific ulama that he was referring to. It was all this, these like a stereotypical reactionaries who says this and that. We are against that, right? Like, so it was kind of a straw man figures. I think this was because most of the elite followers were questioning like their own Muslim identities. Like, is it compatible with their new modern life? So I think it was their anxiety to begin with. And actually the biography opens with that anxiety, like, oh, we live in this time that we are pulled from both sides, but we don't know how to reconcile the demands of the new life. So I think they knew that they couldn't combine them with if they listened to this more conservative side of people, or more like Islamist side that says no westernization, no nothing, so there's that. But of course, Kenan Rifai was not the only one, right? All the journals of the second constitutional era, you can see most Islamist Muslim intellectuals were writing against that Islam is not, doesn't prevent progress and this and that. And people who says that, they don't know what they're talking about, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if this is, it's not specific enough, but this is all I know. And in the second question, the context of other, the context of the conservatives, right? That like, so I think this is something I thought a lot about. When you read the articles of Nazım İrem, you see the first, single regime was not as secularist and positivist as we assumed. There was a range of people from different political tendencies, such as the conservative ones like Şefik Tunç and Peyami Safa, Tanpınar, Yahya Kemal, and who were pro-modernity, pro-progress, while still holding on to the tradition, right? They had this like, we need to do it both at the same time. whereas there was also the Westernist ones who were really trying to secularize the governance more and more. So in a way, I would have thought that Kenan Rifai was, friends with these guys. But when I read him, I see more of Samiha Ayverdi vibe in those guys. So I feel like Samiha Ayverdi, who was the successor of Kenan Rifai, she was more nationalist conservative, right? She had a different kind of politics than Kenan Rifai's, like Ottomanist or pluralist, multi-faith, multi-ethnic circle. So I think those conservatives more informing Samiha Ayverdi more than Kenan Rifai. Kenan Rifai stayed in a sense of old establishment, and this comes to your genealogy. Because one of the other questions I had, why was he okay with Abdul Hamid as much as the Unionist and then Atatürk? Like these are three different, or like let's say at least two different ways of modernizers, and he was okay with all of them. And then the books like Kristen Philo on the Muhalefet, I see that idea that the young Ottomans or the Tanzimat elites were the establishment from this old elite Ayan family, versus the young Unionists were coming through new schools and the new intellectuals. They didn't have that kind of background. And I think that's why I cannot see Kenan Rifai more with the sense of these other intellectuals that came out of these schools. I don't know if it makes sense, but these are all my speculations.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks. We probably have time for one more question if it's out there. Give folks a second to think about it. Well, if there's no more questions, Feyza, thank you so much. This is a really fascinating. I have to go read it in Nijmis. It's a fascinating presentation, though, and thanks for being with us to discuss it. For those of you who are here or watching on YouTube, again, please join us on May 23rd for a tribute to Linda Darling. That's going to be our next meeting here. And until then, so long.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.